Hi everybody, the next lesson we're going to talk about today is what's called consequences. Or why would you pick one number over another when you get ready to take a picture? What's the reason for choosing certain number combinations? Well, I thought you'd never asked, so here we go. The consequences of picking one adjustment or another are many. So let's try and break them down and go over what they do, okay? So if we look at f-stops, I've added a couple more so you can see that that number chain or number string does go a little bit further, okay? At a large opening or a big f-stop, big opening, okay, you let lots of light in, okay? That's great. But the consequence of choosing a very wide or very big aperture is that not much of your picture will be in focus either in front of or behind wherever you focus the lens. Okay? So you won't have much of the picture in focus from foreground to background. Now that might be really useful if you want to take a portrait of somebody, say outdoors, and there's other things in the background. Well, you don't want those other things in the background to influence your picture. You want those things in the background to be blurry. That essentially will make your subject come forward because they will be sharp. There's only two things you'll look at in a picture. One of them is how bright it is, the other is how sharp it is. So when you have the camera focused and your subject is sharp, that's where you'll look. When the background's all blurry, you won't look there. So if you're taking a portrait, a bigger aperture, f4, f2.8, f2, are highly desirable, okay? But let's say you want to, I don't know, say go to Mount Rushmore. And you want Grandma and Grandpa and the kids and you and the neighbors and everybody in the foreground to be in focus, yet you want the sculptures of the presidents up on the mountain to also be in focus. You want everything in focus. Well, you can do that by selecting a high or a small aperture like f22. That's a very small opening in the lens. Okay? So by selecting f22, you will have more of the picture in focus from foreground to background. Selecting an aperture of, say, f2, you will have less depth of field or less of the picture in focus from foreground to background. And it's quite that simple, is what it really does. The next thing we start to look at is shutter speeds, okay? Now, if we're hand holding the camera, which most of us will do, I would say about the slowest you can hand hold the camera is about 1/30th of a second. Anything below that and there's too much natural waver or wiggle in your body to hold the camera still. You actually have to practice this, squeezing the shutter, breathing so that you're not moving the camera. So a good rule of thumb is try to never shoot below 1/30th of a second if you're hand holding. Okay? So I like to shoot, say, at 1/60th as my minimum hand hold shutter speed. That's a good rule of thumb to use. Okay? Because remember, there's two things in a photograph we'll look at, right? Bright and sharp. Well, if the camera is wiggling or moving, then your pictures will be blurry or soft, and then there won't be anything visually interesting to look at because nothing will be sharp. Well, that's not a good photograph, right? That's not a good image. So we want things to be sharp. So if we're hand holding the camera, 1/60th is about as slow as we can go. Okay, what about ISOs? Okay, this gets to be a little bit different when we start looking at what happens inside a digital camera when we begin adjusting the ISO. If we want the sharpest, clearest pictures possible, we really want to shoot down here, 100, maybe 200. Okay? That will yield us the sharpest, clearest looking pictures. But let's face it, we go to take pictures of a friend of ours playing volleyball, or a basketball game, or a Friday night football game, right? Well, there isn't much light inside high school gymnasiums, or the football field, or the basketball court, right? There just isn't much light. you're not going to be able to shoot at ISO 100 or 200. You're probably going to be up here, 3200 or 1600. I know when I shoot high school football games, I'm pretty much at 1600. It's just what you have to do because there really isn't much light at these venues where you go to. Now, the consequence of bringing these numbers up on your ISO is that your picture will become a little less clear because you will have been introducing what's called digital noise. So the higher you go up on these numbers, the grainier or the fuzzier the picture will look. Now, today's camera manufacturers have done a great job even allowing you to shoot this high. I've seen some that are 256. That's incredible. And the pictures are still very usable. They won't be as clear and sharp as, say, 200 or 100, but the fact that you can even take usable pictures at these high ISOs is pretty remarkable. The modern digital camera is truly an amazing piece of equipment. So don't hesitate to run the ISO up if you have to. Because remember, we don't want to be shooting at slow shutter speeds. The pictures will be blurry. I would much rather you bring the ISO up higher and then allows you to bring the shutter speed up higher so that you have sharper pictures, but they have a little noise in them. Than if we had a slow shutter speed and everything was blurry. That's not a good picture. Okay? So a little bit about consequences, about picking one f-stop or another, one shutter speed or another, or one ISO or another. Okay? Remember, less depth of field or less amount of the picture in focus from foreground to background. Too blurry, that's slow shutter speeds, get a tripod. Okay? This allows you to freeze motion. So if somebody's running or jumping, or you want to freeze a car moving or somebody on a bicycle, you want a fast shutter speed. And that allows you to freeze the motion. Okay? So my typical settings at the high school where I shoot football games is f4 at 250th of a second at ISO 1600. Now, occasionally I have to go to 3200 because I want to keep this fast shutter speed. This is about minimum for shooting high school football. Anything slower than that, and the players will be all blurry as they run. And that's not a good picture. You want to be able to see their number. You want to be able to see inside their helmet. You want to be able to see what school they're playing for. And you want to be able to freeze the motion. You don't want much blurriness in the picture. That's not a good picture. Okay? A little bit of blurriness can be okay, but just a tiny bit. A lot of sports photographers try to shoot at 250 or 500th of a second. If you're outdoors on a bright sunny day, you can easily get up to 1,000th of a second. And then you can freeze all the motion perfectly just the way you want it. So there are consequences to choosing one f-stop or another, one shutter speed or another, or one ISO or another. So keep that in mind when you're deciding what numbers you're going to choose or what settings you're going to choose on your camera. This is going to be driven by what your subject matter is, okay? So short or shallow depth of field, good for portraits. Big depth of field, good for foreground to background, everything's in focus. Landscape type picture. Slow shutter speed, a little blurry, get a tripod. Fast shutter speed, freezes motion. High ISO, noisy, grainy. Low ISO, sharp and clear. All right, that's all I have for you on consequences to all of the settings you can do or use for your camera.